A couple years ago, I made a video defending beloved fantasy author Brandon Sanderson from a weird hit piece put out by the site Wired. In that video, I talked about how much I'm worried that journalism as a whole is dying, and now another publication, one I'd previously respected, has done it again. This time, it's an LGBTQ publication called Out Magazine, and this time, they released a hit piece right before Pride Month, and the author being lied about this time is me! Hey, what's up everybody? I'm Savvy and welcome back to Savvy Writes Books. On this channel, I talk about book reviews, video essays with media analysis, book industry commentary, and more. So if you're interested in videos about those type of topics, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel because I put out videos every week to 2 weeks or so and you won't want to miss those. This video does not have a sponsor, so quickly I would like to give a thank you to my Patreon supporters. Thank you so much to everyone who supports this channel, who believes in me and my work. It means a lot to me. If any of you guys are interested in getting some bonus content like behind the scenes blog posts, sneak peeks of books that I'm currently writing, occasionally live stream recordings, sometimes bonus videos, things like that, then you can check out my Patreon linked in the description below. And don't forget that while you're in that description below, you can see my top tier Patreon supporters who contribute $5 a month and up. They can link their own stuff in the description below as well. So some of them link like their YouTube channels, their Etsy shops, things like that. Thank you guys so much for all of your support. It really means a lot to me. And if you want to stay involved in this community here and want to keep talking about these topics outside of the YouTube comments, but you don't want to join Patreon right now, I also have a subreddit, r/SavvyWritesBooks, where we talk about all of these kinds of topics. There's lots of American Girl doll memes there and stuff too, so it's a lot of fun. All right, happy Pride Month, everybody. Who's ready to talk about the absolute hell world of LGBTQ community online discourse? Discourse right now is one of those words that's gone the way of things like gaslight and gatekeep and girl boss, meaning that the internet has absolutely destroyed the meaning that it originally had. In fact, in her book, Imogen Obviously, my favorite author friend of all time, Becky Albertalli, made a great joke about pedantic discourse within the sapphic community by calling it titcourse, which is a pun that I loved so much that I literally got it tattooed on my boob this past January. I would show you a picture of it here, but YouTube is extremely sexist when it comes to what we can and can't monetize, so it's up with like some blurring on my nipples on my Instagram somewhere. You can check it out there, but like, isn't that great? I'm feisty today, okay? I'm a little feisty today, because in this video, I will once again be defending Becky, plus I'm going to be defending another queer author named Erin Aceves, along with the usual queer authors that I often need to defend, like Alice Oseman and Casey McQuiston, and also myself. We are all queer authors here, okay? We are all, I guess I could say friends. I'm friends with Becky, but my point is, within this author community, we all have respect for one another. I don't think Alice Oseman actually knows who I am, but I also have a tattoo of Nellie from Heartstopper, so Alice, if you're watching this video, hey, what's up? I love your work. My point is, all of us queer authors are cool. There's no beef. None of us are fighting. None of us have ever fought. But you know how back in the 90s, people used to say sex sells? Well, it's 2025 now, and every market is ruled by the internet, so guess what sells now? Rage. Anger sells, outrage sells. That's why we have things like rage bait. And right as we are sliding into our first Pride Month since our country was overtaken once again by Tronald Dump's gay hatred machine, his gaytrid machine, Out Magazine decided that instead of trying to encourage solidarity among a marginalized group of artists who are all struggling right now, that it would instead get more clicks and therefore more ad revenue if instead they could make it look like we were all fighting. So what happens? I'll start by showing you the article and summarizing it, but then after we go over the article, we're going to need to go back in time a little bit because then there are years of backstory explaining just why this article is so insidious. Okay, so here is the article published by Out Magazine. The title reads, "Why aren't more gay male bestsellers written by gay men? And does it matter?" And then beneath that headline, we have the following deck. Erin Aceves and Savvy Writes Books debate why gay stories written by presumably straight women have become so popular and the backlash that ensues. Alright, we're off to a good start. The article uses two photos, one from the movie Love, Simon and one from the Netflix adaptation of Heartstopper. If you know any of the backstory I'm about to launch into, you're probably already angry, and if you don't, then don't worry, you will be. This article was published on May 30th, a mere 2 days before the start of Pride Month. It's very short, so we're gonna read through it in full, and as we read it, I'm gonna stop and fact-check it periodically, just to correct the most egregious things that are wrong, and then we'll have a big discussion to dive deeper into the things that are wrong beneath the surface. But first, we're gonna do a surface-level critique. Let's go. Actually, first thing we need to fact-check is the deck, the thing below the headline. Apparently apparently Aaron Aceves and I were debating, which, no, we weren't. First of all, until I was tagged in a screenshot of this article on social media, I did not know that Aaron had even responded to my thread, to the thing I posted on Threads that we'll get to in a minute. I didn't even know he'd responded to me. I don't use Threads all that often, so I was not debating anyone. I did not even know that someone had responded to me, meaning I never actually responded back to him. There was no back and forth debate. This was just two people sharing thoughts on the internet. There was no debate. We also know that it's not a debate because Aaron Aceves and I are actually not in disagreement at all. When we see the specific points that each of us uses in our discussions, it's going to become clear that both of our analyses can and do coexist. We're both queer authors sharing differing experiences in the book community, and neither of our experience negates the other person's experience. Both of them exist at the same time, and both of them share different nuances about different experiences that queer men versus women might face and experience while becoming an author. All right, let's get into the body of the article. Are gay male stories only marketable when written by women? That's a great first sentence to the article because it has an obvious answer. No, obviously not. When I first began reading queer fiction back in middle school, the go-to author of the mid-2000s was Alex Sanchez, a queer man himself who wrote the Rainbow Boys series, as well as the both MM and FF book, Boyfriends with Girlfriends. Nowadays, one of the best-selling male authors is David Levithan, a gay man as well. I love him and I love his work. He's also done a lot of work on The Babysitters Club, which I'd argue is a lesbian series. Anyway, we could also look at the success of trans men like Aidan Thomas with his best-selling book Cemetery Boys, plus we've got TJ Klune, Adam Silvera, and the recent Pulitzer Prize winner Andrew Sean Greer. And that's nothing to say for the many queer male authors among the classics like Oscar Wilde and James Baldwin. And that isn't even the tip of the iceberg. My point is, what kind of question is that? In general, men tend to dominate every industry, which is in part due to historical male supremacy. And just to be clear, all the authors I mentioned are fantastic writers who deserve every bit of their success. My point is, why would you even bother asking if gay male fiction is only marketable when written by women? History has shown us that it's not. Anyone who reads any books at all knows that that's not true. With the massive popularity of stories like Love, Simon, and Heartstopper, critiques have popped up about them being written by women, especially straight women. The critiques on straight women writing queer stories became so loud that some authors have felt pressured to identify their sexualities publicly, sometimes before they'd even process their sexualities for themselves. Next fact check. I bet you all think that I'm about to say, Love, Simon wasn't written by a straight woman. That's what you think, right? Okay, I mean, that is a true statement. But it's more than that. Love, Simon wasn't written by a straight woman, yes, but also Love, Simon wasn't written by anyone because Love, Simon is not the name of a book. Love, Simon is a movie, and the book it's based on is called Simon versus the Homo sapiens Agenda. The difference may seem trivial, but I bring it up to show that nobody fact-checked this article and nobody cared at all about there being any accuracy in it. And that's because journalism is dying on the internet. And to be clear, yes, the movie had a screenwriter, so it wasn't entirely accurate for me to say that it wasn't written by anyone, that nobody wrote it. I was just being a little cheeky there, okay? Anyway, getting back to it. Sure, we can call the book Simon versus the Homo sapiens Agenda gay male fiction. After all, Simon, the main character, is a gay male, and the story is told from his perspective, and it's about his journey of coming out as a gay teen boy. But by putting a picture from Love, Simon right below the headline, and then using it as an example of a critique about books by especially straight women is very odd, especially considering the author, Becky Albertalli, is not straight. And when we get to the backstory behind this, you'll see how absolutely vile it was for the writer to frame it this way. But first we need to fact check a little bit more of this paragraph, where the writer also mentions Heartstopper. Heartstopper is a graphic novel series, and yes, it's written by a woman, but I wouldn't call it a piece of gay male fiction. There is one gay male character in Heartstopper, and yeah, he's one of the main characters, but it's also just an ensemble cast story. There's Charlie, who is a gay teen boy, and then there's his love interest, Nick, who is a bisexual teenage boy who previously thought he was straight until he met Charlie and things started awakening in him. That's kind of part of the plot of the book. Plus, then they have their friends Tara and Darcy, who are a lesbian couple, and their friend Tao, who's a straight man, and their friend Elle, who's a trans woman. And in the Netflix version, they have another friend named Isaac, but his name was Aled in the book, and he's asexual. Alice Oseman, the author of Heartstopper, is, get this, also not a straight woman. She's been out as asexual for years. And also, get this, Heartstopper is a spin-off of Alice Oseman's 2014 novel Solitaire, which is about an asexual woman named Tori. Heartstopper is a spin-off about Tori's younger brother Charlie, who is the one gay male character in the series. So Alice Oseman was writing an Own Voices book about a character who shares her sexual orientation and her gender identity to begin with, and then she made a spin-off with a diverse cast of LGBTQ characters, but I guess since one of them is a gay man, now that suddenly must must make her a straight woman trying to capitalize on gay male fiction. God forbid that anyone have a diversity in their ensemble cast of queer characters. Even though she's both not straight, and she doesn't primarily write gay male fiction. She's categorized in that. Okay, well, now that we've fact-checked that hot mess of a paragraph, let's see where I come in. Author and YouTuber Savvy Writes Books launched a recent conversation about the topic on Threads with her own Pride Month hot take. Fact check, I didn't launch shit.
I didn't do fucking shit. I didn't fucking do this.
I posted the thread on the app Threads, contributing to an ongoing conversation that was already happening everywhere in my feed. I did not launch this discussion in any way whatsoever. My thread was responding to a bunch of other bits of misogynistic nonsense that I saw, which I'll get into when we break down the specifics of the backstory in just a bit. But no, Mr. Journalist, I did not launch this discussion. In fact, I'd prefer that the internet never have this discussion again. The last thing I want to do is revive a sexist conspiracy theory that does nothing but draw divisions between queer men and queer women at a time when we need LGBTQ plus solidarity more than ever. So no, don't say I launched it, because I didn't.
I didn't fucking do this!
So then I get quoted. The straight women are dominating fiction is a moral panic rooted in misogyny, she wrote. Let's look at some examples, all of authors I love. Hank Green was still publicly identifying as straight when he wrote his FF series, and nobody ever got mad at him for being a straight man writing FF with a bisexual female main character. Nobody demanded he come out of the closet, and he got to do so on his own terms when he was ready. Okay, we're gonna talk about the comparison I made to Hank Green in a moment, but I want to interject to say that I also have a tattoo from one of Hank Green's books. It's a quote from An Absolutely Remarkable Thing, which is the sapphic story I was talking about. The quote I have tattooed on my arm is, "It was a huge mistake and also great for views." I love how the choice of conjunction in that sentence does so much to move us to the inferences that we're supposed to draw from it. It's not, "It was a huge mistake, but it was great for views." It was a huge mistake and also great for views. I love that. Ironically enough, that's probably also an accurate statement about this very video that I'm making right now. It's a huge mistake and also great for views. Okay, back to what this journalist claims I did. She gave the examples of Becky Albertalli, Casey McQuiston, and Alice Oseman, who wrote Love, Simon and Red, White, and Royal Blue and Heartstopper, respectively. Fact check, Love, Simon is not the name of a book. How did you get it wrong twice? All these authors were presumed to be cis-het women, then were harassed for writing fiction, harassed to the point of feeling pressured to out themselves. That is not safe or okay. Men continue to dominate the film industry, even when it comes to female-centered films. Men lead the exploitative lesbian porn industry, creating it for a straight male gaze, she says. Ultimately, she's calling for readers to stop policing authors' sexualities and just enjoy the book. My point is, stop wasting time speculating which authors might be cis-het women, and just read some queer books. You never know who is straight or who is cis. You never know what someone might be questioning. There is literally no way for you to know that about an author, and accept that some of this stems from James Somerton-style queer misogyny, because it does. Signed, a very queer woman who writes FF, and more. So yeah, that's what I had to say about this. There's a lot more to the story, but at least that's an accurate representation of what I said, which would be hard to mess up because it's all pretty much just directly pulled as a quote from my Threads account. I'll break down some of the nuances and background information behind all my points as we go through the story more chronologically in a bit, but no factual errors there, alright? We're good. I'd also like to point out that Threads is like my least used social media. I have under 2,000 followers on Threads, so I have no idea how someone thought this was a big enough deal for my tiny ass Threads account to contribute to a discussion. Now it's going in a publication. I'm not even famous. All right, let's continue. Aaron Aceves, bisexual author of This Is Why They Hate Us, believes that's not the whole picture and replied to the thread with his own take. Wait, why does Aaron get to be categorized as a bisexual author, but I don't? I've literally got the bi flag colored hearts in my Threads username, and I called myself a very queer woman in the thread quoted. Maybe this writer didn't know for sure, but normally when you're doing journalism, you reach out to the sources for comment, but I guess journalism is dead. Anyway, I am also a bisexual author. The man in this article gets to be a bisexual author, but I, the woman involved who is also a bisexual author, I am instead categorized as a YouTuber who launches conversations. In other words, I'm a dramatic-ass influencer who starts shit on the internet, not a fellow queer author discussing my equally valid experiences with biphobia and misogyny in the literary community. But regardless, Aaron Aceves also has some valid points to make, so let's look at what he has to say as told by the article. First off, non-women writing sapphic stories is nowhere near as prevalent as non-men writing Achilles stories, he wrote, referring to the popular gay novel The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. Fact check time! Achilles' stories does not refer to the novel The Song of Achilles. Where did this journalist even get that from? In the queer community, especially in the queer literature community, it's common for queer women to refer to ourselves as sapphic, after Sappho, and it's common for queer men to call themselves Achillean after Achilles. We're not referring to any specific pieces of literature other than the entire canon of Greek mythology when we use those terms. Sometimes we say sapphic and Achillean instead of gay and lesbian because those terms are more all-encompassing for people who are homosexual as well as bisexual or pansexual or anything else. The point is, love stories between two women are sometimes called sapphic instead of lesbian because sometimes the two main characters might both be like bisexual women instead of women who identify as lesbians or identify as homosexual. And some people might also consider sapphic a more inclusive term than saying female because, first of all, female has kind of become a weird incel dog whistle, and also there are some trans women who don't like to identify themselves as female but as trans women because they like to emphasize the gender designation rather than like the designation of sexual dimorphism, although that's going to vary by the person and their preferences. But my point overall is sapphic is a term that includes everybody, so a lot of queer women, myself included, like that term. We like to use the term sapphic. The equivalent of sapphic for queer men is Achillean, named after Achilles and his own queer history throughout Greek mythology. So queer stories between two men are often categorized as Achillean because often the male leads, they might not both be gay or homosexual, they might be bisexual, pansexual, something else, right? Does that make sense? When Aaron said Achilles stories, he wasn't talking about a specific Greek retelling or a specific novel that was published in the 21st century. He was using Achilles in place of MM or male or men, in the same way earlier he was using sapphic in place of FF or WLW or lesbian or something like that. I have no idea why this author thought the book The Song of Achilles had anything to do with this. Good job researching the book community, bud. Okay, enough roasting the writer, let's get back to what Aaron has to say. Second, for me, a queer male author writing queer boys and men, it's about the author and audience feedback loop. When non-men write for non-male audiences, their work is usually gushed about, even when they get things wrong or write something problematic, which is possible for anyone writing outside their lived experience. It becomes even worse when queer men write about their own experiences and are labeled dangerous because the non-male audience is accustomed to unrealistic or less nuanced descriptions of queer male sexuality, which happened to me. I was literally accused of writing CP. See, this is an example of how Aaron and I are not actually at odds. I agree that it's unfair for people to disparage queer male authors when they're writing about their own experiences. The LGBTQ+ community has a wide variety of different experiences, and Aaron, as a queer man, deserves to share his own experiences through fiction like any other queer author. And I'm really sorry to hear that someone accused him of writing CP. That is horrible. Dude, I'm so sorry that happened to you. And I'm looking forward to reading Aaron's books after this because I really think the world does need a lot more bisexual male representation, and knowing that there's a bisexual male author writing own voices books and advocating for this is really good to know. So my point is, I support him too. He didn't disagree with me. I didn't disagree with him. There was no debate. So Aaron, I'm really sorry that happened to you. Aaron also already knows that I wasn't debating him because we tagged each other on Instagram in agreement about the fact that we hate this article. What does this journalist, though, have to say about Aaron's response to me? A long-time critique about popular stories like Heartstopper is that they're sanitized to present their romance as PG. There are many gay shows and movies written by men, but the most popular ones as of late are from people not of that experience, and they're often marketed to younger or female audiences. Younger or female? Younger or female? Women and children first. Men are one thing, women and kids are another thing. It's like when I'm speaking Polish and I add a K into things. K denotes something being small or being feminine. Little and feminine, big and masculine. Nothing heteronormative in this at all, alright. Anyway, that section I just read was not a quote from Aaron. This was a piece of the journalist's own opinion that he snuck in. The piece about Heartstopper, and let me just say, Heartstopper, first of all, is not a gay male story. It's an ensemble cast story about a group of friends who represent a lot of different identities across the LGBTQ+ spectrum. Second, I think it's really weird to criticize a YA story about minors for being too sanitized. There are already a lot of pieces of teen media that portray things like teen sex, teen pregnancy, and more. And those things should be portrayed because those things do happen sometimes, and it's important to represent a wide variety of experiences. But they're not a universal experiences. A lot of teenagers are not ready for sexual relationships, whether physically or emotionally. The overwhelming majority of my friend group in high school did not develop any interest in sex until their early 20s, and some in their mid-20s. The ones who waited till their late 20s or 30s for the most part did end up coming out as asexual eventually, but even among the straight men and the bisexual men that I went to high school with, most were not ready for sex as teenagers and felt uncomfortable about trying it. Some people find sex at a young age to be intimidating. Some aren't thinking about it at all before adulthood, and there's no reason that they shouldn't also get to be portrayed in fiction, especially considering it is a fairly common experience. The fact that Tyler and I were doing sexual things at 17 was considered early for my friend group. Now, that's not going to be true for every group of teens, right? It's almost like different people have different experiences, and some people, queer men included, don't want sex outside of a long-term relationship, and some do, many do, some don't. Both experiences are valid. Some people want casual sex with lots of people before marriage, outside of marriage, whatever. I did that back in the day. It was fine. I had a good time. Some people like that, and some people don't. I don't know why. Different people have different experiences, and multiple different experiences should be portrayed and can be celebrated is a controversial thing. It's not. It's great. Let's keep doing it. I love Heartstopper because it portrays a group of friends who are a lot like my friends in high school, and most of us are queer, the men too, and Heartstopper was relatable to all of us. Not every teen boy is aggressively horny. Some are, a lot of them are, and that's valid to represent in fiction, but not all of them are, and that deserves representation too. We can just have more books. Now we're back to a quote from Aaron, the other author here, who is about to share more of his valid experience, not this made-up shit from the journalist. Readers, typically non-men, read Heartstopper, love it, then trash my book because the protagonist doesn't just want to hold his best friend's hand. This also happened to a number of my queer male author friends, wrote Aceves. Even the most popular gay books turned movies written by men like Call Me By Your Name have faced similar critiques. Okay, so the first part of that was Aaron's quote, the second part was the journalist's interjection. Which part do you think was accurate and which part do you think wasn't, okay? So all Aaron is saying about Heartstopper specifically is that too many readers are comparing his work to Heartstopper, that it got very popular, so a lot of people are reading it and saying, oh, I expect queer books in general to be like Heartstopper, which is not a good thing to expect because, again, everyone has different experiences and different books are going to portray different experiences, so we all need to keep our minds open. Yes, Heartstopper presents a version of teen dating that isn't super sexualized, and that's a valid and normal experience to represent, but Aaron is saying that if he wants to write stories that do include more sexual experiences, that's also a valid and normal thing to do, and I agree with Aaron. It isn't fair for people to be like, I liked Heartstopper better because your book is too sexual, and use that as like a legitimate critique against Aaron's work. That's a stupid critique. I agree, that's dumb. That's a very weird critique to have. More than one book can coexist, and it's good for different books to portray different experiences. Aaron did not deserve for his book to be trashed because readers wanted it to be more like a different book that it was never claiming to be like. So once again, Aaron and I are not at odds. There is no debate here. But then the journalist has to slip in another strange piece of his own commentary, which means it's time for another fact check. If we're using queer authors who are out of the closet, who are also the same gender and sexual orientation as their main character as the metric for this discussion, then why is Call Me By Your Name even relevant? The author of Call Me By Your Name has always publicly identified as a straight man. He has a wife, and I tried to look up if he's ever talked about being bisexual or anything, but everything I find is him talking about being a straight man. Now, he has talked in interviews about how he enjoys writing characters that have more fluid sexualities, so it's possible that maybe he's bisexual and he's not out about it yet, or maybe he has a fluid sexuality that he doesn't want to talk about and he doesn't like share that part of his life publicly. That's fine. Authors do not owe the information about their personal life, especially their sexual life, to anyone, but it's just really weird to me that an article about gay male books by gay male authors that are confirmed gay and out of the closet, that's what we need to read. They're using an example of a book written by a male author who does not identify as queer publicly in any way, shape, or form. It's almost like this article was lazy as fuck. Also, Call Me By Your Name is a really weird example to use of a book by a man not taking off because it was literally adapted into a movie and it was one of the big like mainstream movie releases, so it absolutely blew up and got huge. The reason I personally don't like Call Me By Your Name is because I don't like stories where adults have sexual relationships with minors, and I call this out when it's in straight stories, heterosexual, male, female, stories between a man and a woman. I call it out in those stories too. I've had a decades-long crusade against the movie Almost Famous for that very reason. Don't get me started on why I absolutely despise the movie Almost Famous and its representation and the way it glorifies sexual assault. Don't even, okay? In fact, gross groomer stories happen more in man and woman romances and in heterosexual spaces than in queer ones, but I'm disgusted by seeing it happen ever, so that's why I don't like Call Me By Your Name and why I have no interest in either seeing the movie or reading the book, because I think that's disgusting. Anyway, back to this butt shit article. He believes there's a double standard. There's also the sheer difference in success, sales, and adaptations for MM books based on who wrote them. Compare Red, White, and Royal Blue, Song of Achilles, Simon vs. Heartstopper, and Heated Rivalry to They Both Die at the End. Aceves concluded, I am not policing anyone's identity, I just want queer male authors to receive more support than we currently are while representing ourselves. Yeah, that's perfectly valid. I agree. I agree that queer male authors should be supported and encouraged in their publishing journeys. I agree that it's good to promote Own Voices books as having an author's lived experience baked into the narrative as a desirable feature of that book. I agree. And guess what? I never once said otherwise. In fact, these are two entirely separate discussions. This is not a debate. You'll see what I mean as we get deeper into the backstory. Now you may be like, Savvy, did James Somerton write this article? And if you ask that, that would be a great question. I can see why you'd think that. It does follow a particular Somerton-esque pattern. First, the reporter has written almost none of this article himself, instead choosing to let quotes from me and Aaron Aceves take up the majority of the word count. And second, the parts that the author does actually write are inaccurate, specifically inaccurate in a way that fuels misogyny against the sapphic community. Welcome back, James Somerton. You would have loved the way Out magazine is slandering women. But if you're like, Savvy, I didn't really get that from the article. I didn't see any James Somerton vibes. I don't know what you're talking about with the misogyny here. I don't notice any misogyny or biphobia or lesbophobia in this article. Well, don't worry. Whether or not you understand why I'm so mad just yet, okay, by the end of the video, you will. So let's go back in time 10 years. Let's go 1 decade into the past. A decade ago was 2015. It's fucking surreal that 2015 was a decade ago. Like, that's my college graduation year. It's my 10-year college reunion year right now. But I was mistaken for a 20-year-old twice last week, so I'm going to keep using my Hello Kitty face masks and aging gracefully and taking that as a win. In 2015, we saw the launch of the Own Voices movement, which was a term coined on Tumblr by a bisexual and disabled woman who wanted to see more stories told from the perspectives of people who shared the experiences with their characters. Own Voices as a hashtag, as a book categorization, a marketing term, a movement, whatever. It was never intended to say, let's criticize authors for writing outside of their lived experiences. It was meant to say, let's uplift authors who are writing about their lived experiences and give their books some extra love and attention, which I love. Unfortunately, just like Gaslight Gatekeep Girlboss, everything gets fucked up on the internet. 2015 was also the year that Becky Albertalli released Simon vs. the Homo Sapiens Agenda, the book that would become the movie Love, Simon 3 years later in 2018. Side note, right now, that means it's the 10th anniversary of Simon, so that means there are 10th anniversary editions. Hold on, I just gotta show you this. Look at this! Look at this! They have, the special edition has rainbow sprayed edges. It has a metallic title. Look at that, the title is in metallic, and the sweater he's wearing is fuzzy. Like, the cover has 3 different textures, and then the sprayed rainbow edges. I love this edition. I love this edition so much. You guys should get it if you haven't already. So anyway, that was 2015. Following the success of Simon vs. the Homo Sapiens Agenda, plus the success of the movie Love, Simon, Becky was often asked in interviews about her personal experience writing this book. Mainly things like, hey, your main character is gay. Are you gay? Which is just a wild thing to ask someone, right? Like, if an author hasn't already spoken publicly about their sexual orientation, what makes you think you'll be the one that they come out to before anyone else? That's really weird behavior. I already made a video about the specific issues that went on with Becky. I will link that video down below. It's from like 4 years ago. Don't be jump scared by my shaved head and my pre-breast reduction Keurig machine K-cup boobies, though. You can watch that video in full, but I'm also going to give a quick summary of what happened. Basically, the internet harassed Becky for being a quote-unquote straight woman profiting off of queer fiction. And also, side note, can I say that is a wild thing to do, to accuse an openly Jewish woman of sneaking into communities where she doesn't belong just to profit, just to make money? Okay. In the years following the success of the Simon book and movie properties, Becky started getting critiques on social media, some of which I will show you from throughout the years. Not to be dramatic, but I'll die if I read another gay love story written by a straight lady. I liked Song of Achilles and Simon vs. the Homo Sapiens Agenda, but it is painfully obvious they were written by women. Please recommend me a book written by a gay man. Based on a book written by a straight woman, I have feelings about heterosexuals making our stories heteronormative ideals of what they think it's like to be gay. Things literary fiction doesn't need any more of. Number 6. Straight women writing gay male YA for other straight women. Seriously, stop it already. Gay boys are human beings, not your creepy fetish. All of Becky Albertalli's books are male and male or male and female. It's screaming fetishizer. Guys, guess what? The book that got adapted into the Hollywood movie Love, Simon was written by yet another straight white woman. Guys, straight white women are not the CEOs of gay men, guys. Okay, let's fact check that one. That this isn't true. The overwhelming majority of Becky's books are not love stories between two men. Simon is the book that took off and got the most famous, but even back before 2020, Becky had other books out, like The Upside of Unrequited, a book about twin girls girls with lesbian moms, and Leah on the Offbeat, a romance between two women where one of the main plots is the main character struggling to come out as a bisexual teen girl. And now in 2025, almost all of Becky's books are sapphic. Imogen obviously is one of my favorite books of all time. And as of this month right now, Becky just released a new book called Amelia If Only, which is also a sapphic book. So I have no idea where this person is possibly getting the idea that all Becky writes is romance about queer men when that's the minority of what she writes. At this point, it's almost all about queer women. Most of my books are about queer women too, but under my romance pen name, I've written a few romances about two men falling in love. You know why? Because authors enjoy exploring different types of stories and writing through a variety of different perspectives. Glad I could clear that up for you. Back to Becky's harassment. Mostly it's the vapid, one-dimensional writing that has zero basis, as she's a straight woman who's never gone through any of the things she writes about, and she writes about them all the time. Of course, the book Love Simon is based on is written by a straight woman who would never have to deal with being outed before you're ready, being blackmailed into outing yourself. Like, fuck, what's with a straight woman profiting off of the horrible, messed up story about a gay kid? According to both of these posts, Becky has apparently never gone through the things her characters have gone through, and this is based solely on their understanding of the book Simon versus the Homo Sapiens Agenda. In that book, Simon gets pressured out of the closet against his will, and the story concludes that it's unfair because nobody should be pressured to come out of the closet before they're ready. Those old ass comments are saying that Becky could never know how that feels. She's never gone through that. Well, as fellow queer author Oscar Wilde would say, life imitates art. Because actually, the thing that Simon went through, where you get pressured to come out before you're ready to, is exactly what happened to Becky back in August of 2020 when she wrote a blog post on Medium about this experience. You know what's a mindfuck? Questioning your sexual identity in your 30s when every self-appointed literary expert on Twitter has to share their hot take on the matter. Imagine hundreds of people claiming to know every nuance of your sexuality just from reading your novels. Imagine trying to make space for your own uncertainty. Imagine you had a Greek chorus of internet strangers propping up your imposter syndrome at every stage of the process. The thing is, I really do believe in the value of critically discussing books, particularly when it comes to issues of representation. And I believe in the vital importance of own voices stories. Most of the identities represented in my books are own voices, but I don't think we as a community have ever given these discussions the care and nuance they deserve. Let me be perfectly clear. This isn't how I wanted to come out. This doesn't feel good or empowering or even particularly safe. Honestly, I'm doing this because I've been scrutinized, subtweeted, mocked, lectured, and invalidated just about every single day for years, and I'm exhausted. And if you think I'm the only closeted or semi-closeted queer author feeling this pressure, you haven't been paying attention. But if I can ask for something, it's this. Will you sit for a minute with the discomfort of knowing you may have been wrong about me? And if your immediate impulse is to scrutinize my personal life, my marriage, or my romantic history, can you try to check yourself? Anyway, all of this is to say, I'm bi. Sorry it took me so long to get here, but then again, at least the little red coming out book I needed was already on my shelf in about 30 different languages. I would have thought that people would learn from this. Maybe they would feel sorry, maybe apologize and reevaluate their standards and consequent behavior. But no, instead, here's how people continue to talk about Becky on social media after this happened. She should have thought about that before writing a LGBT book. Of course people will be mad. These stories still aren't yours to sell or fetishize, and I'm sad that instead of being constructive about this criticism, Becky instead chose to be angry and guilt-trip those criticizing her. It's going to get worse before it gets better, y'all. Continue to hold these authors accountable and support your gay authors selling gay stories even harder. Isn't that what she's doing? There's so much disingenuous stuff here around what is being asked of writers too. Most often this comes out after a writer is critiqued for a bad portrayal of a community based around a sexuality or an experience with it, not just of the sexuality in general, and then they go, well, you have forced my hand. Technically, I am of the sexuality that could be in this community. Now you have outed me, you monster. When all that was actually said was something like, we don't need to see another straight person's take on the dyke bar scene. Well, if you said that, she's not straight, so you were wrong. If a woman feels pressured to come out as queer to defend herself, maybe she was in the wrong all along and she's just looking for an excuse. In that case, the pressure to come out is self-imposed. Yes, you ruined own voices, but not by coming out, and yes, strangers discuss your sexuality again and again because they can see through your scam. That one is a DM. That was a direct message. Someone sent that to Becky in her DMs directly. Thank you to Becky for sending me that screenshot. I love you, Becky. I will lay down my life for you every time because we are in this fight together. Or who conveniently came out as bisexual through some alleged midlife epiphany as a marketing ploy to protect herself from criticism and also to sell more books. Again, if we're doing intersectional analysis here, I think it's pretty weird to keep telling a Jewish woman that her entire life and her entire identity is a marketing ploy to sell more because of course all she cares about is money. Fuck that. She may not be straight exactly, but she is part of an entire industry of hetero-ish, mostly white women telling the stories of gay men, and it bothers me a lot. It's at best misguided trespassing, and at worst rank appropriation bordering on fetishization. Being bisexual is not being hetero-ish. Queer people get enough hate from the far right as it is. I'm not going to accept hate from fellow queer people. If you're calling Becky hetero-ish, you need to also call her lesbian-ish with the equal weight, okay? But you're not, because this is biphobia, and it's also misogyny. The reason I say that is that Becky isn't the only author this has happened to. In fact, this specific problem of harassment faced by authors writing queer characters, but being accused of being straight, pretty much only happens to either women or people assigned female at birth. It pretty much never happens to cisgender male authors. And that was the point I was going for when I made this post on Threads. That was the history with Becky specifically. But we also saw something similar with Casey McQuiston, who wrote Red, White, and Royal Blue, when they faced similar nonstop criticism for supposedly being a straight woman trying to profit off of queer men. Later, Casey ended up coming out as non-binary. Casey was not straight nor a woman, yet they were accused of being both. Of course, there was no way for readers to know this without Casey telling them, but that's my point. It's unfair to demand personal information about any author. My point in all of this always has been, there is a big difference between saying, hey, I really want to read some Own Voices books. I want to read about the experience of being a queer man, and I want to read it from a queer male author's perspective. Give me some recommendations. Those are the books I'd like to prioritize this Pride Month. That is a normal and valid thing to want. That is an absolutely acceptable request. You should ask for that because it's important. The issue is when people start claiming that the entire queer book community is dominated by straight women. There has never been any proof of this being true, and it's a false allegation that keeps pressuring authors out of the closet before they're ready, yet people never seem to learn. Becky posted this essay to Medium where she came out of the closet back in 2020. 5 years have gone by since then. Half a decade has passed. And now we have Out Magazine using an image from the movie based on her book, the book that sparked the discourse that forced her out of the closet, and that image is paired with a headline and a deck that categorizes her as a presumably straight woman. Do we see what's misogynistic here? Do we see the biphobia in that? Do we see the hatred and cruelty toward a fellow human being? I really thought people would learn. And yet, when I went on Threads to check up on some book community drama for all the videos I've been making, what did I see but the exact same discourse being revived once again? So as I was seeing this happen, I was noticing that it was specifically women being targeted here, specifically women one after the next. These threads were already posted well before I added my own. I did not launch this discussion. I was seeing it happen all over Threads, and every time I see this discussion start up again, it almost always leads to another queer author being harassed or abused or pressured to come out, and I just didn't want to see that happen again. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized how much this problem doesn't normally affect cis male authors, at least not on the same scale, and I was starting to wonder, could this be rooted in misogyny? Why is it that when a man writes a book about queer women, that's seen as representation, but when a woman writes a book about queer men, she's assumed to be straight and only writing for the purposes of fetishizing them or turning a profit? So then I thought of one of my favorite male authors, Hank Green. So it's time for another bit of backstory. Hank and John Green are known on YouTube as the Vlog Brothers. They are two YouTuber author hybrids, and both of them are people that I absolutely love. When I've discussed the concept of Own Voices books in the past, John Green was an author I've actually talked about a lot. In 2018, John Green released Turtles All the Way Down, a book about a teen girl with OCD, which John based very strongly on his own experiences having OCD as well. Now, I have OCD myself, and I was very happy to see an Own Voices book talk about someone with OCD when it was written by an author who knows the experience, and as a result, I loved the book. I thought that it had so many of those specific experiences and idiosyncrasies. I could relate to so much of like the small bits of detail that I don't normally see in other books. So then I got to thinking, okay, if queer women writing books about queer men isn't considered Own Voices because even though the author and the main character would both be queer, they're different genders, would John Green's book still count as Own Voices? Like, his book is about a teen girl and he's a grown-ass man, but they both have OCD. They don't share the same gender identity, but they both have OCD. So is that Own Voices? I'm not entirely sure. But then I was like, does it really matter? I am a woman with OCD. I didn't personally care that it was written by a man. I still thought it was Own Voices because the experience of having OCD was told from the author's lived experience, and I thought it was portrayed well. Similarly, why can't Becky, a queer woman, write a book about a queer man and have it count as Own Voices? How many specific characteristics do you have to share with the main character for it to count? And by the way, just in Becky's defense, just to run some defense here real quick, I do want to make it clear that Simon versus the Homo Sapiens Agenda as the book was never marketed as an Own Voices book. Becky was not out at that point. She did not market it as Own Voices. She did not try to profit off of that. She was never trying to mislead anyone either way. And she was often promoting Own Voices books about queer men written by queer men, about queer women written by queer women. She's always been very supportive in promoting Own Voices books in the author community, and she did not market this one as Own Voices at all. So then after I was pondering John Green, I started thinking about his brother Hank, who's also one of my favorite authors. Like I said earlier, I have a tattoo from An Absolutely Remarkable Thing. Actually, right here, I also have a tattoo from Turtles All the Way Down. I've got a lot of book tattoos, and I'm only going to get more. In that book, the main character, April, is a bisexual woman. She has a girlfriend at the start of the book. She occasionally has sexual tension with some of the male characters, but after her breakup, her main romantic subplot in the book is then with another woman. So this was a book written by a man telling the story of a queer woman. At the time that this book was published, when I was first reading it, I wondered, is Hank Green bisexual? In part, I thought he captured the experience really well. I really liked the writing, so I was like, I wonder if he's bi too. So I looked it up online, and everything I could find was that Hank said he was a straight man. He was a straight man, he was an ally to the queer community, and I was cool with that. The book was good. The representation never felt offensive to me in any way, so I didn't care whether or not it was Own Voices, or even if it could ever be Own Voices due to the main character being a woman and Hank being a man. Regardless, I liked the book, I left it a good review, I enjoyed it, I got a tattoo from it, and I moved on. Then, a few years later, Hank Green eventually did come out as bisexual, which was not surprising to me, because again, he wrote it very, very well. His coming out was casual. It wasn't even a tweet announcing that he was coming out, it was just like him replying to someone else's tweet when he casually said, "I'm bi," and there was some background context, and the whole internet was like, oh my god, congrats on coming out. I thought this was a really nice moment, and I was glad that he got to come out on his own terms, that no one had demanded it from him. And so I wondered, why is it that when he wrote a book with a bisexual female main character, the response was largely, I'm so glad that this man is representing queer women. I'm glad he's writing strong female characters instead of just centering men all the time. Why was that the response instead of, wow, this straight man is profiting off of his lesbian fetish? And to be clear, I love that he didn't get that response. I think it's great. I started to think, hey, maybe we're finally done with this useless bit of discourse. Maybe we can finally recognize that it's not right for readers to demand personal information about authors and their personal private lives. But no, because then when I log back onto Threads in the year of our Lord 2025, what do I see but a revival of that tired old discussion of all these straight women are dominating queer fiction. And to me, it really seems like the general public only starts discourse about it when the author is a woman or assigned female at birth and presumed to be a woman. And that's why I was like, we all have a little internalized misogyny, okay? Even in the queer community, LGBTQ plus community, we're not immune from misogyny either. So I was like, let's unpack what that might mean. My thread was very specific. I talked about how when you compare how men versus women have been treated in the queer book community, when you take, just boil it down to two examples, to boil it down to Becky Albertalli and Hank Green. Becky was at the time a not yet out of the closet woman who was publicly presumed to be straight, who was writing a book about queer men. Hank Green was a man who was not yet out of the closet, publicly assumed to be straight, writing a book about queer women. Just take those two identical situations and see how different the public reaction was to it, okay? They both ended up coming out, but the terms on which they got to come out of the closet were very different. So I'm like, just look at this direct comparison, okay? I talked about how when you compare how men versus women are treated in the book community, there is clearly disproportionate abuse toward women authors, often queer women. And that abuse often comes in the form of accusing women of being straight unless they disclose personal information to you. That is not something that usually happens to male authors. And then, because the internet is so full of discourse damaged brain rot, I got a ton of responses that have absolutely nothing to do with what I was talking about. Things like, not only do they want to write outside of their lived experience, but they want to talk over everyone who has said lived experience. They use the example of Hank Green, but I've never seen him entering sapphic spaces trying to take over with fetishizing rhetoric and light homophobia. It is not at all the same. Okay, I agree on the point that I also have never seen Hank Green entering sapphic spaces and trying to take over with fetishizing rhetoric and light homophobia. You're right, he hasn't done that. He's very kind and respectful to the sapphic community. But I'm confused as to what this person means by it's not at all the same. It's absolutely the same. It's the exact same situation. I've asked over and over again for people to give me a single example of a straight woman entering Achillean spaces and trying to take over with fetishizing rhetoric and light homophobia. I agree that Hank did nothing wrong, but neither did Becky, neither did Alice, neither did Casey, neither did any of these people. When did Becky enter a male space and try to take over with fetishizing rhetoric or light homophobia? Oh, what? She didn't? That never happened? And yet she experienced harassment as if she did? That was my comparison. Hank Green never did that that to queer women. Becky never did that to queer men either. That was my point. And then we had this. In the absolutely not a shot category, the women in the replies are all for women writing fiction. The men, not so much. Though few go so far as to say it's a bad thing. It's a bad thing. And no, being bisexual or pansexual or a female at any point in one's life does not one qualified to write about anything other than the broadest male-centered fantasies. Y'all didn't complain Hank Green wrote FF, that's on you. Okay, first thing, when they said female at any point in one's life, a female at any point, is that a transphobic dog whistle? I just noticed that right now, where they're like, being bisexual or pansexual or a female at any point in one's life. Are they trying to say that, like, if a trans man wrote a queer book, that it wouldn't count? Am I misunderstanding that? Anyway, I'm gonna focus here on the last line. Y'all didn't complain Hank Green wrote FF, that's on you. Yes, I see that Hank Green was not harassed out of the closet in the same way that Becky Albertalli was, but looking back, maybe he should have been. Maybe we should have criticized him. Maybe we should have complained about this. Maybe we should have maybe instead of not abusing the queer female author, we should have abused the queer male author too. We should have just abused more people. No, you shouldn't. Leave authors alone. Here's another example of a queer male author who writes women fiction. Chuck Tingle. Actually, his first major novel release was Camp Damascus, a book told from a lesbian's perspective. And that came after years of him writing a ton of novellas and short stories which featured a variety of different characters across the queer spectrum. I'm actually in the process right now of working on a deep dive about Chuck Tingle, whom I love. He's like, I say that like Becky and Hank and all these people are my heroes. Chuck Tingle is like my literary hero. We're about to get into it in next week's video, okay? So I'm working on a deep dive about why I love him and why I love his work, but he's another example of a male author who writes sapphic books and doesn't get harassed for it, as he shouldn't. Again, if you feel that any particular book portrays its characters in a way that fetishizes them or represents them poorly or has an air of homophobia or anything else you don't like, that is a valid critique. You should say it. Readers have the right to critique the content of any part of a book, and authors would be out of line to respond to that or to get upset about that. It is valid to criticize a book for any reason, as long as that reason pertains to the book's content. I've read multiple Own Voices books where I thought the representation was bad, despite the author sharing that gender or sexual orientation. I've read books by bisexual authors with bisexual main characters where I was like, this doesn't match my experience at all. I don't really like how this is portrayed, but that's because we all have a variety of different experiences and different people are going to resonate with different things, which is why more books is a good thing. It's reasonable to criticize a book if it fetishizes or demonizes queer characters. It's reasonable to request recommendations for Own Voices books specifically. It is not reasonable to start assuming an author's identity or claiming the author's gender, sexual orientation, or anything else caused the book to be the way you didn't like. My criticism was pretty clearly that I didn't like the specific moral panic that straight women are taking over fiction. I started getting some replies claiming, well, even if you're a bisexual woman or even if you're a lesbian, you still can't portray the queer male experience as well as a man can, and if you think that, that's fine. You can think that. That's a normal, valid preference to have. You're allowed to think that. That has nothing to do with anything I was talking about, because I wasn't talking about the abstract philosophical question of, can women write men well? Can men write women well? Can queer women write queer men well? Can straight people write queer people? I wasn't even engaging in that discussion. My thread was saying specifically that there is a specific moral panic that straight women are dominating fiction, and that I am objecting to the assumption of an author's sexual orientation or their motivation for writing a certain thing in a certain way. If you want to talk about how a gay man writes a gay male story better than a lesbian could write the same book, you can talk about that. That's fine. It doesn't go against anything I was saying. In fact, it's completely irrelevant to anything I was talking about, because I was only talking about the presumption of an author being straight and how that presumption uniquely and disproportionately tends to impact authors who are not cisgender men, and in part, I think because it's rooted in internalized misogyny and people find women easier to criticize. I'm just really exhausted with queer women being told we need to know our place, being told that we're doing something outside of our lane because we're not. Recently, one of my favorite lesbian bars in Chicago got taken over by gay men to the point where it's primarily now a gay male bar. This is not the first time this has happened. I'm now down to 2 lesbian bars in the entire city of Chicago, while gay men have dozens of bars and have recently dominated one of the only 3 that were remaining, so now most women don't want to go there anymore. This is something we see happening a lot in IRL queer spaces. A lesbian bar will open up, and then due to, on the whole, men having more money, men having higher incomes than women, more men will frequent it, and as more men frequent everything, within 5 years, now it becomes a gay male bar, and the few lesbians there get accused of being straight women who are going to the gay bar just so men don't hit on them, when no, it was our bar to begin with. But do you see me on Threads complaining that straight men can't stop taking over the lesbian bars just to fetishize the women there? No, I don't say that, because that would be inaccurate. That didn't happen. It would be disingenuous for me to frame it that way. And I'm also not here to police who goes to what bar. I'm also not in the business of trying to put queer men and queer women against one another, especially in a time when the government wants us all gone. Y'all, Project 2025 doesn't care if the queer books are written by men or women or non-binary people. The Toronto Dumps of the world want to ban all the queer books. In fact, Simon versus the Homo Sapiens Agenda is one of the most frequently challenged books when it comes to book bans based on inappropriate content. The far right does not care if a book about queer men was written by a woman. The far right wants all of us gone. That's why when Out Magazine put out this disgusting piece of slop, I shared it on Thread saying, let's make it look like queer people are fighting right before Pride Month. I'm doing journalism. Is that what journalism is now? Rage bait that makes it look like marginalized groups are fighting, trying to sow division among a group where everyone is in danger? I very rarely accuse anything of being a psyop, and I'm not saying this article was, but what the fuck was it? During a time when we have a president calling for the end of Pride Month, when states are constantly introducing new bills to hurt trans people, when people in our government want to end marriage equality rights, when the big corporations won't even pander to us anymore because it's not cool to be gay in public anymore, during this awful time for the whole LGBTQ community, a well-respected queer publication wants to try sowing division among queer authors, a community targeted by nonstop book bans who are falsely accused of being predators because we think it's okay for kids to know that there's nothing wrong with being who they are. You think now is the time to try to make it look like we're fighting? Fuck off! Read queer books. Celebrate queer authors. If you like a book but you're not sure if the author's queer, judge the book based on the quality and then move on to something else. If you want to read queer books by queer authors who are already out of the closet, then say that and ask for recommendations, and you can even do it in my comments and I'll gladly give some to you. But I'm tired of queer women in the book community facing constant harassment for choosing to tell our own stories in our own way. So I guess I was allegedly slandered by a magazine, but you know what? I couldn't think of a better group of authors to be slandered along with. Happy Pride Month.